Start the recording. Um, so this wonderful documentary and the great engagement will just be sent out to all of you that attended and that had registered privately. And we are so excited to have you all. We would like you all to change in the bottom corner, open the chat, and please change it to panelists and attendees. As we watch the documentary this evening, Erin will be in the chat interacting. Please chat away, ask your questions. You can also put your questions in the Q&A function, and any questions we aren't able to answer in the text during the documentary, we'll answer shortly live. We'll get to the couple that we can. And with that, I'm now going to introduce our guest, Erin Gruwell, tonight. She's a teacher and education advocate, and she's the founder of the Freedom Writers Foundation. This is our second evening with her, and we're so proud and grateful to have her in the Freedom Writers Foundation, and John Paul, who's here also as support. So I will now turn it over to Erin. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of you who watched Anne and I. We're like giggly girlfriends. And the only thing that's missing is our PJs and some popcorn, because that's what
Oh,
really girlfriends
popcorn, yes.
do when they have a slumber party. So first and foremost, I am a teacher, and my classroom continues to change. Sometimes it has walls, sometimes it has boxes, and tonight it's going to have your computer screen. And what I'm so honored about is being able to share our story. I use the word our and we a lot and collectively because as a teacher, I believe in the Socratic method. And that's a fancy way of saying that I just want my class to be student centered. I just want my class to come alive for all that I teach. So what I love about the PTA, that is your value. That is your moral compass, is anything and everything for those that you humbly serve. And in the district, you serve a lot. So what we're going to be doing tonight, which is really exciting, is we're going to be watching a documentary that was created by and for and about my students at the hands of those same students. When my students first entered my classroom in room 203, which you will see in a moment, sadly, they were transients. They had moved. They were in the foster care system. One boy you'll meet on the screen named Calvin had been to 42 foster homes by the time he was 14. And if you are constantly moving and constantly transient and have had moments of being homeless, the things that you lose along the way are the mementos, the photograph, the home movie, your favorite pair of sneakers. And so what I realized very early on is I just wanted to capture those moments. So I brought in an old school Polaroid camera and my VHS recorder, and I just left them out for my students in those magical moments to pick up the camera and to document, to fill each and every one of our walls with photographs in the way that when kids go away to college and they go into a dormitory and it is barren, you put up things on the wall that remind you of who you are and where you come from. And so in that very classroom, very quickly, family was what we made, family is what we chose. And then as we started leaving that cocoon, leaving that classroom, which you will see, we also took those cameras with us. And that camera took us around the globe. We found ourselves with thousands of photographs, hundreds of hours of film footage. And my students had this idea that maybe we could make a documentary. And we did just that. And what I love about this documentary that you're going to see is it is available to you for free on your local PBS station. The reason we chose PBS is because I'm a public girl. I went to public schools, I taught at public schools, and I love that PBS shares that sentiment. It's by and for and about the people. And so, since I serve kids who didn't have gadgets, who didn't have access to fancy channels like HBO, we thought if we're going to make a documentary, it has to be accessible for that kid who has that television that still has rabbit ears for reception. And so we were so proud to partner with PBS. We did so right before the pandemic hit. And so, what an honor and gift that this beautiful documentary aired throughout the pandemic. Um, what an honor and gift that this documentary actually won an Emmy this summer. And I gotta tell you, it's not sexy to win an Emmy during a pandemic. I was in my pajamas at home watching it on TV like the rest of the world. But what an amazing honor for my students to say that what you captured, what you said, your truth and your narration will last a lifetime. So, my hope is for each and every one of you, whether you're a student or a parent or a teacher, is to capture those moments. You'll see throughout this documentary the actual parents, my PTA, my brethren, going on field trips with us, my parents, my family, my PTA walking into room 203. And I don't think any of us then realized where we would be now, but I couldn't have done it alone. It truly was a village. It truly was a journey. And that was our destination, taking that journey together. I will tell you, there are some moments that are so raw and tender that you may get a little lump in your throat. You may feel a little tinge in your fingertips, and you might have your eyes well with tears. And that's what I love about this film is it makes you feel, it makes you think. And the tribute that I say about that knot in the throat, the tingling of your fingertips, and that welling of tears happened with our most beautiful test audience. The Freedom Writers wanted to get it just right before they put it in the world, before it was like a message in a bottle. And we tested this documentary on a group of young folks who were incarcerated, who were not at our public schools anymore. And when the lights came on, these beautiful boys in an orange jumpsuit were sobbing. I don't ever want to forget that moment. I never want to forget that moment where a piece of art speaks to a child when they feel relevant and when they feel seen. And what I encouraged of each and every one of those beautiful, brilliant boys was to get out of that juvenile hall and to go back to their local public school. And I hope they did. And in doing so, I hope they were embraced by those teachers, by those parents, and those fellow students, because our story is really about change. It's about second chances. It's about writing a new chapter and envisioning a new ending. So, our documentary is aptly called Freedom Writers Stories from the Heart. And I hope that you watch with just that, an open heart and an open mind. I'll be thrilled to chat with those of you in the chat room who have questions. I'm going to be the last one to leave the Zoom if you have questions you want to have answered at the end. But without further ado, I'm going to put all of you in the 6th district on a magic carpet. I'm going to bring you into my crazy classroom, room 203, here in Long Beach, California, to take the best field trip of all with my PTA and your PTA. So welcome to Stories from the Heart, and may each and every one of you have your heartstrings tugged. So without further ado, here's our film.
They were the gangsters, the taggers, the chronically apathetic, and they weren't very good at English either. And who was the first-year teacher assigned to handle these kids? It's Stand and Deliver meets That Girl.
No!
A dynamo of a teacher dressed in a pearl necklace and Nordstrom separates.
I didn't expect Erin to try to teach us anything. I knew that she was nothing more than a babysitter.
I think I gravitate towards the kids who are the toughest initially. It's a very competitive edge. It's like, can I crack that kid? But that was very evident, but they didn't want to be there. The Rodney King verdict had just been announced. I was in my early 20s. At that time, I was living in Newport Beach, this safe, idyllic seaside community. Up until that point, I had planned to actually be a lawyer. And I turned on my television, and just 30 minutes from where I lived, people were looting, there were riots.
Thousands of people went on a rampage, a riot, still angry about the verdict in the Rodney King beating trial.
One of the things that really concerned me was seeing children. It made me realize that children, they listen and they watch, and adults become these role models. Watching that unfold and seeing those teenagers and seeing that angst and that anger, something happened, and I realized I wanted to make a difference. That I had this epiphany that being a lawyer might be too far gone from the problem. I didn't want to fight battles in a courtroom. I think it was more noble to fight battles in a classroom. So on that first day of school, I want to explain how truly clueless I was. I was going to wear polka dots, and I was going to wear pearls. I had this little leather Coach attaché case for my syllabus. I went to my classroom, and I looked around, and I realized there was no technology, there were no textbooks, and there were no eager students ready to dive in and pick up that syllabus that I had worked on. And so I waited. The tardy bell rang, and in came my students.
I moved to Long Beach when I was 12, and life got really real, really fast. My father left, my brother went to jail, my mom was sick, my best friend died.
My parents, I think they were forced to marry. My mom was pregnant at 13 and had us at 14. All I remember was a lot of arguing, a lot of fighting, and it was very violent.
I came to this country when I was 8 years old. And right after we crossed the border, my mom told me that I wasn't gonna see my dad again. I was living with my mom and her friend and 2 other friends in a garage.
We were just so done with education. By the time we got to 9th grade, I never thought I would graduate at all. If your teacher thinks you're a stupid little Mexican kid, you know, then why are you gonna, bust your ass to try to get good grades for them, you know?
And then in walked this little girl. She was so defiant. She had an ankle monitor. She had a probation officer. She had a father who was in a maximum security prison. And I found out that she had just been released from juvenile hall a few days before school started.
When I was 5 years old, I witnessed my cousin get shot 5 times in the back. It wasn't a rival gang, there was police officers. So I always had this sense of like, there is the justice for other people and there is the justice for us.
I was scared of Maria, because she was all cholad out, like all gangster, you know? I was seriously worried that she might shoot me if I said the wrong thing, you know?
I used violence as a sense of defending myself and getting what I wanted. And that's the way it was when I was growing up, and it kept on. It didn't change as I got older. It just got worse.
Day 1, I didn't give a about them. Maria's got an ankle bracelet on, whatever. It might shock other people. It's my life. It does not shock me. It does not stir me. As long as you don't cross my path, I have no problem with you, but I'm not thinking about you. That's how I grew up. Looking around at them, it was like looking at nothing, because I didn't care.
A lot of the students were just bad. You know, they just went to school because they had nothing better to do, you know, and because there's food there. You know, I mean, that's why I went to school half of the time, you know. If I had money, I would have ditched, but since I was broke, I couldn't ditch because I couldn't buy any food, so I just go to school to eat. I didn't expect Erin to try to teach us anything. I knew that she was nothing more than a babysitter.
I think I gravitate towards the kids who are the toughest initially. It's a very competitive edge. It's like, can I crack that kid? But that was very evident. They didn't want to be there. I could walk into my classroom and I could tell who's pissed off, who's jaded, who's hungry, who's bored, who can't wait to get out of here, who hates my guts.
I think anybody in that situation, you gotta be scared out of your mind. You have to be scared out of your mind. Have to be. Have to be. Because not only are you dealing with people that don't care that you're a teacher, They don't care about you. It's personal.
The fact that she was white, there was no way in hell that somebody like her and that looked like her was ever gonna make a difference in my life. She had this smile that I knew if she even had anything close to what I had grew up with, she wouldn't have that smile.
So the only way she could have possibly reached us is by having guts.
Who in the group has experienced intolerance as a teenager in Long Beach? Okay, what's gone on in your life, Darius?
Being stopped by police, mistaken identity, crime.
Okay, how about Lisa?
One of my salvations was to go in there and to be positive and to be upbeat and kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and to go in there naively, not wanting to know initially what their track record was or what their grades were like. And so I think that was a great gift to my students, because I didn't prejudge them. I didn't come in with a set of expectations, and I didn't write them off immediately. A lot of my teaching strategy was to really listen to my students.
Okay, anybody else in the group?
And just being humble enough to say, I don't know the answers, and I'm gonna ask a lot of questions.
Daisy.
Miss G's interest in our personal lives was immediate. I think she just wanted to know, like, our motivations. And I think we were all really reluctant to let her in.
I'm gonna ask questions because I'm not from Long Beach, and I don't know who Snoop Dogg is, and I don't know your community, and I don't know all these elements of pop culture that I'm competing against. And so I need to know what you're watching, what you're listening to, where you go when you leave school.
Has anybody run away? Has anybody thought about running away? Okay.
Come on now.
Okay. Why? Why?
Exactly. That's why I stay in the streets so much.
Why?
Because it's like, me and my moms don't get along. Me and my pops don't get along.
I've always been a pretty candid, honest type. But this is not a shining moment where somebody's gonna show up from Publishers Clearinghouse and there's gonna be some check waiting on me because I answered all the questions the right way. You know, ain't shit gonna change.
I felt that she wanted to feel good about herself, to make her life validated somehow by her being a good teacher. And if I'm a good teacher, then I'm gonna, change these ghetto kids from the hood. I was gonna be damned if I was gonna be one of those kids that was gonna make her feel good. I think she tried to get to know me, and I made her pay for that because I thought somehow she already knew who I was and she just wanted me to tell her.
I think she was oblivious and nosy. She was always asking us about our personal life, and I thought, why would she even want to know? Usually in African-American homes, you don't share what goes on in your house with anybody, regardless of who they are.
To me, I thought that my life really wasn't any of her business, I was a rough kid, really rough around the edges. When I walked into Erin's class, I had been in foster care since I was 8. I was walking home from school one day and I see about 4 or 5 police cars in the driveway with my sister sitting in the back seat. And she said, we're gonna be taken away from Mom. I am sure that one of the reasons why we were put in foster care is because a teacher noticed bruises and called Children's Services. So my first impression of Erin was, she wasn't my friend, she was my teacher. And to me, teachers were people who got you put in foster care.
As a teacher, you're trying to reach as many kids as possible. For me, it was, how can I reach every kid? And so when it's obvious that a kid is not engaged, it became this competition for me is, how can I get them engaged? How can I make them want to learn? When I knew they didn't like reading, when I knew they didn't have books in their homes, they had never read a book from cover to cover, I realized what I have to do is take those stories somehow and parallel their own lives. And so I started learning about life in the streets and about this gang rivalry, the Crips, or the East Side Longos, or the TRGs. And I decided that I was going to teach my students a story about rivalry, Romeo and Juliet. And we were going to bring Romeo and Juliet to life and watch West Side Story, the musical. When we turned on the movie and the jets and the sharks start rumbling, Henry looks at me and says, "Miss Jean, when gangsters fight, there's no dancing, there's no pirouettes."
Before you plant something, you have to turn the soil over. You have to dig the dirt up, turn it over. If we were dirt, we were the hardest dirt, you know what I mean, she could have found, you know.
I wanted them to treat these books and this kind of new curriculum idea I have like a tabula rasa. We're gonna wipe the slate clean, we're gonna start over. Doesn't matter that, you know, so-and-so has this GPA or so-and-so has been kicked out of this school before. Like, I just wanted them to kind of start over. And so, in kind of my traditional campy way, everything's always very kinesthetic and a little over the top. So I decided to have this toast for change.
So we walked in there. We saw a lot of plastic cups and bottles of cider. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. It really didn't hit me at that moment. Didn't make sense to me at that moment. But we did the toast, and she started talking about, well, you know, I'm pretty sure we all made mistakes and we all want to get a second chance.
To her, it was very literal. We could toast to the fact that maybe we could turn our homework in early, or we're gonna be in our seat when the bell rang. I mean, things like that. And to me, it was so much bigger than her classroom, because my life was in her classroom. The things that made a difference in my life or were gonna impact my life had nothing to do with homework.
And it became this moment of everyone talking about these issues that weren't about number 2 pencils and they weren't about standardized tests, but they were so deep about, they were tired of being the poor kid. They were tired of being picked on.
You get tired of feeling like the world just on you. You know, I got this going on, I got that going on, and there's all this bullshit over here.
I kind of grabbed my champagne glass and I toasted to the fact that I didn't want to end up 6 feet under like my cousin. There is this possibility that I don't have to have the life that I always thought I would. And I didn't think I could ever do well in her class if I didn't change who I was somehow.
We started just really laying down things. A girl toasted she wouldn't get pregnant early. I toasted I didn't want to be like my father. At that moment, I felt free. You can go forward. You can build on today. You can walk out of this classroom and really have a completely different life experience if you only try. That's the one sacrifice you have to make, is to try.
I think they got swept up in that moment, not realizing that there was this academic component attached to it, which was, okay, now you have to read these books. And the first book that we would read would be The Diary of Anne Frank. And I think Maria, of all students, she was furious because I think she felt I had tricked her, that she was very excited about changing. She just didn't want to read a book to have to prove to me that she could change. She became the benchmark for reading this book because she truly did not want to read it. In her mind, Anne Frank was not Latina, Anne Frank did not come from the hood, Anne Frank did not speak Spanish, Anne Frank didn't live in Long Beach.
I took the book and I went home, and I was still on house arrest, so it's not like I could go do other things. There's a picture in the front that looked all of, 12. I looked at that picture and there was nothing that I could relate to. But with nothing else to do, I opened this stupid book because in the back of my mind, I thought that I was gonna prove Ms. Gruwell wrong.
She would come back every day and she would ask questions about Anne, kind of in juxtaposition to her gangster mentality. And, you know, if Maria was in a gang, then Anne Frank had to have a posse. You know, I revere my father, and Anne Frank reveres her father, and sometimes my mom drives me crazy, and so does Anne Frank's mom. So every day was this kind of ping pong, and based on her questions, and how they all had this kind of like gangster twist on it, I realized that she's actually reading.
It started getting interesting when things started going bad. That's when I thought, okay, maybe she's not this spoiled little girl that I thought she was. Maybe she doesn't have a perfect little life. And that's actually when I took a liking to her. I came to the entry where she's describing this window, her only connection to the outside world. She couldn't even put her hand outside because one of the Gestapo or somebody would know that they were in hiding. And then this bird lands close to her, to the tree and outside the window. And she writes, sometimes I feel like a bird in a cage and I wish I could fly away. I was able to relate to that feeling of knowing the outside world and only having this certain connection to it. And somehow in her words, I found this part of me that wasn't bad, that was untouched somehow. And I wanted to believe that she reminded me of all of that, that maybe, just maybe, the better part of me lived in her. And from then on, I knew she was gonna make it. She had to make it. She was gonna make it because why else would we be reading this book? And she's gonna make it because she's a good person and she hasn't done anything wrong.
Maria came in one day, stormed in, and threw the book across the classroom and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I was kind of taken aback, and I said, "Tell you what?" And she said, "Why didn't you tell me that Anne dies?"
At the very end, when she doesn't make it, I felt that disappointment that I felt every other time in my life when I really believed in something. It was that same feeling of going to the window and waiting, hoping that my father was gonna come home, and he didn't. Every feeling of disappointment all of a sudden came crashing together at that moment because I so desperately wanted her to make it. Because if she didn't make it, then what were the chances of somebody like me that was a bad person actually making it out?
I felt horrible. I felt horrible because I just assumed that maybe she had known. That I just assumed that everyone knew that Anne Frank was this iconic figure of this tragedy. And the fact that Maria didn't know, it was devastating to her. And thus became devastating to me because I never wanted to take away my students' hope. And then something serendipitous happened. Darius stood up and he said, "She did make it. She did make it, Maria, because she wrote about it." And then he went on to say, "How many of our friends have died and we've never even read an obituary? But because Anne Frank wrote about it, she's gonna go on living even after her death."
I think for the very first time, I felt myself changing in a way that I couldn't explain or I couldn't describe. It was just the feeling that I had.
Even though she died, she had transcended what was going on. You know, like she died, man, but she made it out. You know what I mean? Like she made it out, you know, and that made her extra special to me. You know, that made her Martin Luther King special to me. And more than anything, because I was so paranoid that I wasn't going to make it, I wanted to have that. Like, Lord, if they kill me, at least let it mean something.
Reading Anne Frank was this amazing experience because my students bonded with Anne Frank. The trouble was, they hadn't bonded with school, and they didn't love studying, and they didn't love tests, and their grades reflected that. And so we had a lot of work to still do. I was given the opportunity to stay with those same students as sophomores, and so I didn't lose that connection like so many teachers do. Day one, sophomore year, I was able to hit the ground running, and so we really dove into the texts.
I really had a hard time staying focused with reading. A lot of my thinking goes on in Spanish, so when I'm reading, a lot of times I have to translate my reading into Spanish. I read the whole page, and I'm so concerned about pronouncing the words right that when I finish with that page, I can't remember what I just read. So I disliked reading quite a bit.
When I was young, they gave me books that didn't make sense to me. Whenever we had to read a book in school, I would read the first couple of pages, maybe the first chapter, and then I would read the last chapter. And then I read a book report and I'll book my way through it, you know? Bullshit was the best skill I learned in school. And so I remember she gave me Jessie by Gary Soto. And it had like, you know, these two Mexican kids on the cover, like working in the fields. And I was like, what? Like people write books about like Mexican people working in the fields? And it just like blew my mind. Like, I was like, I can't believe somebody wrote a book like this. Like I couldn't believe that somebody would care enough about me to write a book for me.
For me, the books mattered, but not that much. My brother ended up getting sentenced to 15 years to life. And, you know, you go right back to like no faith. So I can read 1,000,001 books, but it was an escape. I can, you know, take this journey, you know, through this book with this character, and I can feel inspired. But at the end of the day, when that high comes down and you close that book, my best friend is still dead. My father was still not in the home. My brother's still in jail.
And so we moved on to the next book, a book about a little girl in Bosnia-Herzegovina who was their age, who watched her friends being picked up by snipers on their way to school. A girl who was afraid for her life.
In the book, Zlato always talked about the snipers being outside, and you had to stay either inside the house or when you ran out, you were basically risking your life. To me, that was me. I was the one hiding in the house. I was the one afraid to go out.
Zlata was still alive, and we wanted her to visit us in Long Beach. We wrote letters to her asking her to come. We wanted her to be able to see that there were other students trying to find out who she was.
We had to pay for actually having her come out.
When she got there, it was like so surreal. I couldn't believe that this little girl was in the middle of a war. And just the difficulties of being a young female and then maturing during a war.
Kind of funny, I had a crush on Zlata. I felt that she was like me in that there was a lot of violence going on around, that she was young, no one was listening to her.
I just felt like she wanted peace amongst her community. She wanted more than what she was, you know, offered. And I think we wanted the same thing.
I mean, I'm trying to just be as I am, but it's impossible. So many things have changed. And I mean, I'm not like other teenagers. I always, in my everyday life, it's always Sarajevo. Sarajevo is always present.
One of the things that Zlata Filipovic really kind of impressed upon me was this ability to share her story. And it made me think, wouldn't it be great if my students could follow in her footsteps and share their story?
Miss G announced that we were gonna start writing. The whole idea was that basically the same way that Anne Frank journaled, we were going to journal.
I didn't like the idea. I want to write about something happy, and I didn't have that. And I was afraid because, you know, I have this fear about my dad. At that time, I was living with my aunt, his eldest sister. And the things that were going on in that house should not be going on. And I didn't want to write about any of that kind of stuff. I was afraid because I thought that I was telling on someone.
For me, it wasn't that easy just to jump right in and start writing about my entire life. No one ever knew that I was in foster care. At that time, I didn't want to tell that story. Although I felt guilty for it because that's what made me who I was.
I was so scared, you know, because of my dyslexia. I've always experienced where I had the words in my head. I just didn't know how to put it to paper. It was just always somehow a shallow version of what I wanted to say. My fear was she's gonna look at this and see my fault. I'm not this perfect little angel. I'm just Sue Ellen, flawed.
The first few journal entries that I read were about things that were so foreign to me. About murder, about being incarcerated, about being 14 years old and never meeting your father. To read stories about parents who were drug dealers themselves and taught their kids how to be dealers. It was so difficult and yet so fascinating. What I'm amazed at is how honest my students were in their journals. And I think a lot of it came from setting these ground rules that a journal was a safe haven, a journal was a place that they can use as a refuge, a journal was not a place for rules. It wasn't a place that I cared about grammar or spelling or punctuation. You can say anything you want to say, any way you want to say it, and you're not going to be judged. I think a lot of these kids were able just to really purge their feelings on a page. It became this very cathartic moment. Their writing was amazing.
Dear Diary.
Dear Diary.
Dear Diary.
Dear Diary.
Dear Diary. Dear Diary. The whole day at school, I couldn't keep my mind off my new gun. I felt like a little boy with a shiny new toy.
Every time I jump somebody in and make someone a part of our gang, it's another baptism. They give us their life, and we give them a new one.
I live in a neighborhood where the sounds of gunshots are my lullaby. The smell of weed lingers in the air, and most of the people around drink 40s like it's going out of style.
I realized that Pandora's box had been opened. For many of my students, I was the first person that they came to reveal these stories. And on the one hand, it was a blessing because at least they had someone to tell. On the other hand, it was a burden because with that knowledge came all of this extra work of saying, if you write about certain subject matters, I have to go to Child Protective Services and I'm gonna have to fill out a report. So you can do that, you can write about these things, but you have to know what my role as a teacher is. I'm gonna have to get you help. And so some of the kids use that as, I don't want Miss G getting in our business. So what I wanted to do is to give my students an ability to tell your story in a way where forms are not filled out. I asked each of my students to use a number instead of using their names. And then somebody donated computers to my class. So then we take these stories, give them a number. Everyone could type in double space, Times New Roman, 12-point font, and then when we turn these stories in, they truly were anonymous.
Dear Diary. Oh my God, it's gone. I can't believe that my someone special gold charm is gone. Nothing has been the same since my parents started smoking crack.
How can I forgive them for stealing the most precious gift that they ever bought me? How could they steal something that meant so much to me? How could they steal from their own child?
Unfortunately, there are people who are like my parents, who shamelessly take from others with no remorse. But I will break that cycle and be a giver.
I know that tomorrow they will be doing it again. They will be getting high from my gold charm. Now I see what is really special to them, the drugs, instead of me.
My Uncle Joe was unlike any other uncle. He was nice, caring, a good listener, and best of all, he always knew just what to say whenever I was miserable. We lived in a very small apartment complex, so Uncle Joe, my younger brothers, and I all slept in the living room. Moonlight filled our tiny room, and the scent of a freshly cut Christmas tree filled my nostrils.
We were reading the story, and it was this girl detailing what happened to her.
What is that? Who's touching me? Whatever it was, I didn't like it. It was Uncle Joe. I wanted him to stop.
The sense in the classroom was heavy. It brought memories back, and a lot of girls just got up and ran out of the classroom.
He was touching me in places I didn't know could make me feel so dirty.
That triggered a nerve. You want to help them, you want to stop what's going on. And you realize, man, this person went through that.
It hit home because, I was a victim of molestation at one point, and hearing that, it's something that you're taught, like, not to talk about it, or you just don't bring that out.
The feel of his sweat and his lips on my skin made me want to cry. A gigantic lump formed in my throat, and to this day, nothing makes it go away.
The hallways are barren. That means school is over. Your mom.
I only wrote at school. Only. Having to study or write something at home when your parents at each other's throats, or my dad, coming home drunk. It doesn't work. You can't be creative and write a good story. There's bigger things going on.
For a lot of my kids, this idea of a home was really this fallacy, because they knew about fairy tales. They could see the perfect home on television. They knew it existed. They just didn't know what that felt like.
I'm not talking to you, sweetie.
The diary, it just gave you a purpose. It gave me an excuse to delay those hours where I would have to be at home dealing with something else. And that was like magic.
It was a safe haven for me. Nobody there was gonna hit me. Nobody there was gonna criticize me, or nobody would question my intelligence there.
Or we had 2 cheap little boom boxes, and we used to dance and just play around and just have fun after school. And so 6 o'clock became 7, and 7 became 8 and 9.
I have to get this done by 11.
She can't be serious.
Not only was I staying out of trouble, but I was also being able to do my homework in the class. So my grades started improving at the same time. If you want to use the computers for typing up a homework, go right on ahead.
Say hi, Bunny. Hi.
That's when they became people to me. That's when Darius was Darius, and Maria was Maria, and Narada was Narada, and Tony and Sue Ellen and Sonia. That's when they actually became real people to me.
I was able to yell on a piece of paper. I was able to be happy on a sheet of paper. I was able to tell on people that I didn't like anymore or loved, or things that I couldn't believe that people that love me would do these things to me. And that was very comforting. And it helped me to finally figure out who my family really was.
It was just this liberation in a way, but I was so scared of that liberation because I've never had that. I never heard anybody want to hear what I had to say, or much less read what I had to write. And it was that act of telling a story that just liberated me from my pain. It was my freedom in a way.
It's ironic when you go into a kindergarten class and kids, they're unabashed and they're just so excited and they're raising their hands and they'll hold their hand up or they might hold both hands up and they blurt out the answer. Kids lose that between being 5 years old and being 14 years old. And I think when my kids were able to get that back, whatever that momentum is or that excitement or that feeling, they were so passionate they couldn't contain it. My students were getting to school at 7 a.m. and wanting to stay till 11. My students wanted to stay together our junior year, and that's when things started getting really difficult.
Erin wanted to continue teaching her students, and the education jargon term is called looping, keeping your kids each year.
There was a lot of resistance from some of the other teachers. By moving up with this group of 150 students, I was going to disrupt schedules.
If you dislodge someone who's teaching 11th grade or 12th grade English, those people who are dislodged are probably going to have to teach 9th or 10th graders. And that is something that causes everybody to get upset. If we were really focused on kids, it wouldn't be that big a deal. As the leader of the school system, I was interested in what would happen if Erin was able to keep these kids. So I was comfortable with being the bad guy that made this horrible decision to allow her to teach 11th and 12th graders.
At a certain point, the news media got wind of our story, and it changed our lives.
They were the gangsters, the taggers, the chronically apathetic, and they weren't very good at English either. And who was the first-year teacher assigned to handle these kids? It's Stand and Deliver meets that girl. No! A dynamo of a teacher dressed in a pearl necklace and Nordstrom separates.
Are you going to graduate?
Yes! As soon as the first newspaper walked into our world, as soon as the first interview happened, that's when I think the animosity began, because we had this ABC special that Connie Chung had created for ABC television because the students were now on this success track of graduating. Some of the other teachers were very resentful towards me. I never quite understood why another teacher would not revel in the fact that a kid is critically thinking and a kid is excited about school, and hopefully that enthusiasm will be prevalent in their class as well. But there was animosity. It was difficult. I had students come to my class and say my teacher stood up in front of everyone and said that you're having an affair with Carl Cohen, which was devastating. It was difficult. It got progressively more difficult. So I spent all of my time in my classroom. I think I walked into the teacher's lounge and kind of heard that cynicism and heard that banter about those kids and them. And I realized that those kids and them were a code word for the kids that I had. You know, the kids that were bussed in, the kids who came from the Springdale housing projects, the Carmelitos housing projects, the kids whose parents didn't drop them off in the morning in their shiny BMW or their Mercedes. The kids that didn't have the academic track records that were going to lead them off to college. One day they brought in this video about the civil rights movement, in particular the Freedom Riders, who were these courageous young folks, Northerners, Southerners, African Americans, Caucasian, rich, poor, And they came together, and the idea was we're going to challenge segregation in our country.
That's when we came up with the name Freedom Riders. We were like, we need to bring all the issues that were going on in the streets of Long Beach, all the violence, the racial tension that was feeding in from the streets into the school. And we had to voice that, you know, there's this injustice going on.
With that came this analogy, like, oh my God, if we're gonna take this name in honor of the Freedom Riders, does that mean we have to act like the Freedom Riders? Those are really big shoes to fill. You know, the Freedom Riders were activists, and they actually did something.
The idea came about actually writing a class book that we were all gonna put our stories together, and it was just gonna be, you know, the stories from Room 203.
And so we bound up our diaries and our journals and stories, and we put it in this huge binder, and we wanted to give it to someone who would listen.
We needed to take our story out of Room 203, to take it to the nation's capital, to take it to the Secretary of Education.
In order to be able to take my students on field trips, I maintained 2 additional jobs the entirety of my teaching career.
To be away from all my family, it was the best feeling I've ever had. I was not fearful of anything happening to us. I remember sitting next to someone that was afraid because that was the first time they ever flown, but I remember comforting them.
As my first time on a plane, it was exciting. But, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, man, just go ahead and land. You know what I mean? Just get us where we're going, please.
What are we doing here in Washington?
Washington, well, we're in the process, we just finished writing a book, all of us. We each wrote our story of our personal lives, everything that teenagers go through. And we're just here to tell them, you know, there's other people just like us.
Hey, come across the room and stuff. It seems amazing. More patient.
I was so excited because, wow, all these monuments, all these museums that are around there. I'm like, wow, do I deserve this? Am I supposed to be a part of this? And am I dreaming?
We are a collective group of voices that will be heard, that have a purpose. And part of that purpose was to take our book, our words, to make a stand. And what an honor and gift that you have in front of you to have this man here, the most powerful man in our country in education.
Don't dare think that because you might be poor, you might not be. But if you're poor, don't think that that's going to deny you a college education, because it isn't, and it should, and it must.
We needed to take our story to the Secretary of Education to make sure that he could not turn around and say that he didn't know what was going on in classrooms across America, because he had 247 pages in his hand that proved that he did.
The name of this poem is called An Innocent Freedom Rider. A young black boy filled with innocence and care, looking for someone, but no one is there. His first day of school, the father's not around to comfort his son when he's sad and down. Looks up to his brother and knows money and power, watching his back every single hour. An innocent boy is now 12 years of age, with himself locked up in a human-sized cage. An innocent young man is now a criminal mind, having nightmares of murders every single time. But this time you'll think this fool should have seen the light, but he's jumped in the gang and they nicknamed him Snipe. Kicked out of the house and left in the cold. Have you ever been through this at 11 years old?
There comes a point in your life where you have to make a decision of whether you want to do right or you want to do wrong. I decided that I wanted to do the right thing.
People say it's hard to see. But people say it's hard to see. This life of emotions is all about me. All this is true because I'm not a liar. Just a broken-hearted male with a label freedom rider.
Somebody came up with this idea that we should honor all of our friends that had been lost to senseless death.
So we wrote names of people we lost in our lives on pins, and we were wearing them as a symbol of that their spirit is still alive. You know, they're still with us, they're still part of us.
We all held hands. And we left the hotel holding hands.
We took a walk to the Washington Memorial, and it was quite a way. And there was 150 of us, and we didn't let go. Everybody started honking at us, and we just kept on walking. I just wanted to be heard. You know, if I had to stop some cars, if people were gonna yell and be mad, then so be it. You know, but somebody was gonna hear, you know, or at least see what we were doing.
We had never been there before. We're in somebody else's city, and we just gonna walk around your city and hold hands and make you look at us.
By the time we got to the monument, there was a paddy wagon waiting for us there. And there was a lot of police cars, and they said they were just there just in case. They thought that we were gonna protest.
That's the beauty of like when you bought into something. Because we're here to pay homage to our fallen friends. So seeing us right now is seeing them. Make it count.
The world just goes by and no one stops to look at somebody in their face, to actually look at them for who they are. And so we stop traffic. And you could feel the presence of this is something bigger than us.
I'll never forget, this man rolled down his window and he was very disgruntled, and he said, "What are you doing?" And one of the Freedom Riders said, "We're changing the world." And I think they really felt we are indeed changing the world. And maybe that world is just our world, but we're gonna leave here different people.
And you're just kind of sitting and you're like reflecting back on everything. But looking backwards on everything it took to get to that night. You look back and you go, whoa, whoa, what's next?
The morning of graduation, I was waiting for the bomb to fall. I was waiting for something that was gonna stop me from graduating, because I knew that I wasn't supposed to graduate. We had a record-breaking graduating class that year, and it was because of the Freedom Riders. You know, because there was 150 Freedom Riders that should have dropped out that didn't. So I walk up, and at that moment, it all just hit me. Like, I just graduated.
A year after my students graduated high school, I organized a trip to Europe called the Ambassadors of Tolerance Tour. And we were going to visit all of the places that we'd read about and bring them to life.
When we went, it wasn't for Miss G or us or Room 203 or Long Beach. We are gonna revisit everything that we learned those 4 years that we were together, and not for a test, not to get into college, not to put it on our resume, but because it made this huge impact on our life, and we wanted to pay homage to it.
Bosnia, everything wasn't back to normal when we went. There were still military forces rolling around the city. There were still buildings that were shattered from missile attacks.
I wanted to go home. Just seeing all this stuff that was going on, I was like, man, what am I doing here?
We met up with Zlata. Now she was showing us her town.
While we were in Europe, we organized these town halls where we brought in community members who had been affected by a genocide and by war. The most powerful town hall that we hosted was in Sarajevo.
We brought Serbs, Croats, and Muslims together to enlighten us on the war and on the issues that they had to face.
In every nation, there are some people that they are very extreme, and they make war. And we here, we make peace, and I'll hope that one day we will win.
During the war, I was wounded twice. How can I say, my child, they wounded me. Who? My friends, my good friends, good people. I don't understand.
This guy is pouring his heart out, but it wasn't what everybody wanted to hear.
That sniper will have a child also, and he will say his child, Muslims are enemies, always. You have remembered that. What can I do?
At that moment, that boy gets up and he talks about the sense of the fact that he can forgive. And I felt the need to say something because I know it so well. And every word that he said was so familiar, and even the look on his face was so familiar because I've had it before, I've felt it before, I've said it before.
Sometimes when things get really heated, it takes a brave person to take a stand on behalf of a group. I think that person for the Freedom Riders was Maria.
I could totally relate when you say that it's hard for you to talk to people that shot your friends and shot your family. I could totally relate to you because that's the way I felt when I was 14 years old. I saw my friends, my cousins, my uncles get shot by white policemen when I was 5 years old. And I remember that like it was yesterday. And I hated white people throughout my whole life because of 2 cops that shot my cousin to death. I remember black people shooting my cousins. I remember Asians shooting my brother, shooting my father. But I remember Stephanie's face, and I remember Henry's face, and I remember Tiffany's face, and I remember Bunny's face. And that overweights anything that I have ever seen in my life, that I have ever heard in my life. So when I go back to my family, I'll be damned if my father ever says anything racist about black people, Asian people, or white people. I'll be damned if any family member of mine ever says a racist joke in front of me. And that's how I'm changing my community. That's how I'm changing my family. Thank you.
We're not invisible anymore. We're not silent anymore. We're definitely not victims anymore. And we want you to notice our story. We want you to notice us. And I think at that time, that's what changing the world meant. In changing the world, they were really changing themselves. What I'd like you to do right now is to identify in your mind some kid who is difficult, and we could take this platform of having a foundation and focus on teachers in need everywhere. Step to the line if you are a Freedom Rider teacher. That's all of you.
Once you say something, it's out there. It exists, it breathes, and it affects people. Make it count.
I'd love to open up. Somehow you can stop now. I'm a little emotional. I've just been so in love with the questions that have come through in the chat room. I'm so in awe of the Q&A. So I've been trying to multitask and answer and wipe tears and just really be present. Just to be present. I think watching this documentary with all of you and knowing your community from my visits, you have a Maria who is feisty and will stand on a chair if you let her. You have a Henry. I just kept putting in quotes that Henry said. I feel like the way I quote Shakespeare, I want to quote Henry. He's so wise and profound and beautiful and brave. I look at Darius in Washington, D.C., and that beautiful poem that he recited to the Secretary of Education. And I'm so excited that we have a new Secretary of Education who's one of us, who was a teacher at a public school, and knows what we go through in our communities. And so watching this while taking out those sound bites or trying to point out the student that was speaking and where they are today was just such an honor. So what I'd love to do is answer some questions that are now coming in, and hopefully there'll be more. Andrew says, she says, you have moved me to tears. I hope to make a change in this world just like you. And Andrea, you will, and you are. Just having that intention and putting it out there. One of you wrote anonymously, how do we find hope in this world? It's in the faces, it's in the stories, and it's in those storytellers that we are blessed to see. I think why the Washington, D.C. moment really rocked me and was so riveting is because of what Tony said. They had to see us. Sue Ellen said that they stopped traffic. Oftentimes the world goes by so fast and we don't see people. And I think that's how we find hope is seeing the power and the possibility in all of our kids. It's been a tough year. We've been at home. We've watched our social media feeds. We've watched social justice and racial reckonings. We can go home tonight and turn on our news feeds and see what's happening in Minneapolis in a trial that is bound to rock the world. Our kids have seen those images. Our kids know what it looks like for 9 minutes for somebody to say, I can't breathe. Our kids know what it's like to know a name, Breonna Taylor. Our kids know what it's like to want to come back to school so bad. And for some, they're scared because maybe being home in their pajamas was a safe place where they weren't bullied, where they didn't feel different. So the world is truly in flux right now. And I think that school is where we can make it right. I think school is where we model what love looks like for a lot of kids who didn't know what love looked like. And so I think that's one of the things that I desperately tried to do was to take some of the hardest students first and smooth out those rough edges. Every single one of those beautiful faces you saw were sent to me because they were sent away from someplace else. They scored below the 20th percentile on every test. They were part of that school to prison pipeline. They had been dismissed and sent on detention or suspension or expulsion from a previous place. And because I was new and I didn't have tenure yet, I was supposed to be a babysitter with my polka dots and my pearls. And in that beautiful, chaotic place, I think we all changed. I think we all changed. I certainly changed as a teacher. And I think I was blessed to have 150 teachers myself. Each and every one of those kids were able to stand up and to speak up at some point. Um, how lucky are we when we hear it, when we capture it? What I love that you were able to see is all of those PTA members who went with me to Washington, D.C. 150 kids. That's terrifying. 150 kids getting on a plane, staying in a hotel, going to our nation's capital, getting all gussied up. I went to my PTA with hat in hand and said, I need help. I need moms. I need dads. I need chaperones. And they came. And they sat beside kids who were scared on that plane because they'd never been in a plane. They held hands when we were crossing a street and someone was honking. They sat beside them at a fancy dinner and they showed them which fork to use first, what to do with that cloth napkin. I learned a trick from one of those PTA moms, B and D. It's like gang signs for your butter plate and your drink. You know, if you sit down at a fancy place and you see all those forks, all those knives, all those spoons, all those glasses, all those extra plates, you might feel like you don't belong. But my PTA moms were throwing up some gang signs, B and D. And I tell you what, sometimes when I go to a fancy restaurant to this day, I do my little gang signs under the table. This is my butter plate and this is my drink, because of my blessed PTA, who took a risk and came with us on that trip. We almost got arrested, as you saw. That was not part of the PTA plan. But my superintendent was there. My superintendent was there to walk the police chief off the ledge. And what a glorious moment. Thought I was going to lose my job. I thought I was going to lose my livelihood. I love that my students were volunteering to go into what they called the paddy wagon. They said, if we're going to get arrested this time, let's make it count. And I don't encourage that for any of you PTA. It's very stressful. But to have those parents to be with me, to remind themselves, this is why we've done those bake sales, why we've washed those cars, why we've set up our shingle to make some money so that kids who need to see the world can see the world. And so what I love about all of us gathering tonight on a school night, no less, that we are doing so because we believe in our kids. They are hurting and you get to help them heal. And as they slowly come back to school, and as they slowly start raising their hands and asking questions, the healing's going to take place. And so, what I'd love to do is for any of you that have questions or comments, please continue to send them. Oh, here's a beautiful one. Eric, do you want to read this question that just popped up?
Yes. The process you achieved was partially due to the fact you were their teacher for 4 years. I believe that teaching is much more effective if you have the personal relationship and trust with students. How could the system change in order to save more kids?
It's a great question. You know, I was able to keep them for 4 years, and it was a struggle. Oh my goodness, I was new and accidentally on purpose, I got to teach them their sophomore year. So that was how I looped the first time. But for that junior and senior, ooh, it was fisticuffs. I was disrupting the powers that be. But the irony is nobody wanted my students. They had been written off. They were called dumb and stupid and nothing. The irony, one of the first things I put in the chat room was that Jessica, who spoke Spanish and was in English as a second language all the way through her middle school years, came to Wilson High with a label. Her father had, I believe, a 7th grade education and her mother an 8th grade education. Her mom was 13 when she got pregnant, and they both dropped out of school. Jessica's now Dr. Martinez. My sweet Jessica is now Dr. Martinez. And what I love about the power of education is every time she walks into a room with Latinx students, they look at her and they say, I look like you and I talk like you and I come from a place that you come from. I love that about her. I love that Sonia came into my classroom and she was undocumented. I love that she's a proud dreamer. I love that we were able to finagle a full ride scholarship so that she could go to Cal State Long Beach and graduate with honors and distinction. I think all of our kids deserve that. I think all of our kids deserve that, no matter what shape, size, color, or hue. So I think that's what we do is we find those beautiful kids and we give them a second, third. For Darius, maybe it's the 73rd chance. Maybe there'll be a 74th. But school is where we can make it right.
I'm going to just finish off with a couple of thoughts. And one of the things that was just put into our chats, our Q&A, was the pearl is the queen of gems and the gem of queens. And you, Erin Gruwell, are definitely a pearl. So I think, you know, when PTA was founded in 1897 and we are celebrating our 124th year, we know that this is the long fight. We're here for the marathon. And when Erin came to California State PTA convention in Long Beach in 2008, I was 13 and was just starting my journey as a PTA leader. And I know between my mom and I, we're almost hitting 50 years of advocacy. And we know that this is where we belong. And we know this is the fight for the students that we need to continue to make. And here's to the next 120 years.
Mm, mm. You know, Eric, I love that you and Anna are this dynamic duo. And you're not just connected by DNA and a last name. You are connected with this mission and this mandate. And I think that you are more empowered than ever because I think tough times make really tough people. And in the 6th district, what the fine folks that have joined us don't know is how eloquently and passionately you talked to my colleague and I about your community. Like your hair was on fire. Like the sense of urgency. And I kid you not, it was so palpable, like it felt like the screen was vibrating. And I just wanted to honor that passion and your purpose because of the love that you and Anna and everyone in this place right now has for our kids. And we got to make up for a lot of lost time. I know that you are ever the realist, but you are ever the optimist. And I think that's what we have to do is we have to dig deep and we have to find our people. We have to find people who see what we see and feel what we feel and make us not feel so crazy, because it's going to get a little harder before it gets a little easier. And so what I loved is for those in the chat room who were giving a shout out to a Miss Usan or Maestra Evelyn, we need to remember that the superheroes don't fly around in capes and colorful underwear and jump over tall buildings. They show up. They clean their classroom. They have a little stash of food in a corner for a kid who's hungry. They see a kid who is hurting and they give him a smile or a hug, even in a pandemic. So my hope for all of you is to be there for one another, to build up, to share those stories, to be on speed dial, because I think we all need to find our people. If there's enough of us, we might just change the world. And so where I'm so blessed and so emotional is I still get to see my people every day. You know, the Freedom Riders are still my family. My Freedom Riders are still fighting so hard that other kids can have other opportunities just like them. And so at some point, I hope they can come to District 6. It's like, it'll be like a rock concert. I kid you not, it's gonna be better than Justin Bieber. It's better than The Weeknd. When they show up, I love to watch the faces of the kids. You know, I watched those videos of Beatlemania and I thought, oh my God, you know, these girls are going cuckoo crazy, throwing bras on a stage. No one's gonna throw a bra on a stage with a Freedom Rider. I'll tell you that right now. It's PG-13 fun. But that kind of mania that the Fab Four Beatles kind of evoked all those years ago, I didn't understand it. It's a silent mania when I see kids stand in a line, and I have seen kids take out a Sharpie and say, "Can you sign my arm?" And I've seen kids say, "Can you sign my shirt?" One of the Freedom Riders, Maria, kissed a little boy on the cheek, and he said, "I am never washing my face again." And I thought, oh, please, please wash your face at least sometime. But it was those simple gestures of just want to touch and feel someone who knows me, who knows my story, who knows that I can be a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder and a little bit better. And I think that really could be the mantra of District 6 PTA is collectively making people a little bit bigger, a little bit bolder, and a little bit better. And so when those fabulous Freedom Riders show up to town, I just want to be a fly on the wall. I want to be that crazy mom like you saw in Mean Girls, in the tracksuit in the back, videotaping it all and saying, "Those are my kids. Look at my babies." And while I'm looking at my babies, you guys get to look at all of yours. It will be exquisite. So if you'll have us, we will come. There was one of my students had a bootleg copy of Field of Dreams, and there was a line in Field of Dreams that if you build it, they will come. And so maybe, just maybe, when the world is right yet again, if you build it, those Freedom Riders will certainly come.
We look forward to it at one of our future luncheons. So, one last question before we end our evening. It just came in. How did your kids react whenever you got emotional around them?
Probably embarrassed. Probably surprised. I was told in the halls of academia when I was getting my teaching credential and my master's that you don't smile till Christmas, that you don't hug a student, and you certainly don't cry. You know, for some people, crying is a weakness. And you know, the first time I saw one of my big, beautiful boys fight those tears, you know, bite their lip, clench up their fist, and fight those emotions. I wanted them to have a release, to let it out. You know, sometimes a good cry is really cathartic. It's like a purge, and it's like a baptism. So Darius was our biggest boy and also the biggest baby. He cried a lot. And what's amazing is he didn't cry when his dad died of AIDS. And he didn't cry when his brother was sentenced to life in prison. And he didn't cry when his best friend blew his brains out playing Russian roulette. And he didn't dare cry when he slept on that cold cot in a juvenile hall. So for 14 years, this boy kept it all inside. And then one day it was like taking your finger out of a dike, and he let it go. And the weep became this visceral wail. And it pierced the silence. And I think with that visceral, guttural wail, it let all of us let it out. to either breathe or to weep and to feel emotion. And it was beautiful. It was exquisite, actually. And so I would say to any of you, we have Dariuses in our midst, kids who bottle up, push away, push down, and suppress, and don't want to share that emotion because they are told that if you cry, you may never stop. Sometimes it's okay to start. So, for any and all of us, I think it's important for us to show emotion, to show our humanity, to be real. And that's why I think it's so easy for me in this space because I feel that you guys have created and nurtured a really safe space. So, in my messy tears, it's a tribute to all of you that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be exposed and it's okay to have a good cry because maybe we're all having that baptism together.
Well, thank you so much, and we really appreciate everyone who was able to attend this evening. And we'll send out the recording to all those that registered, and we will see Erin and the Freedom Riders at one of our 6th District annual luncheons very soon. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you at our next event.
Bye, Erin. We love you.
Oh, I love you more. Thank you, Susan and Minerva and Ms. Logan. Oh, thank you so much. To Carmen as well. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for the chat. Thank you for the tears. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.